Welcome back to Carolina Journal Radio. I'm Donna Martinez. With the coronavirus dominating world, U.S., and state news, it's easy to forget that we are only about 7 months or so away from the 2020 presidential election. What will this public health challenge mean to politics? Rick Henderson is editor-in-chief of Carolina Journal. He joins us now to talk about the political implications of what we're all experiencing. Rick, welcome back to the program.
Thank you, Donna.
We have seen the state of Ohio postpone its presidential primary. Is it chaos or really organized chaos as each state tries to figure out what to do?
Well, each state's going to do what its leaders think are best for that state. There are a number of people across the political perspective who are somewhat troubled by Ohio's decision to do that, because essentially, there's a very stringent set of rules for when elections are to take place. For primaries, states set that. But for general elections in federal years, Congress sets that. And there are rules involving things like absentee ballots and military voters and that sort of thing, which are federal laws. And so there's some concern that if other states start doing that, then there could cause some problems, some constitutional issues that nobody wants to actually hash out right now. I mean, they'd rather keep people safe. So there's that angle to it. Probably the fortunate thing for all, at least on the federal level, is that it's pretty clear that the two presidential nominees from the major parties are settled. It's going to be Donald Trump and Joe Biden. I mean, there's not much doubt about that. But you have an awful lot of states where you have primaries for races from, the lowest level of municipal government all the way up to U.S. Senate. And so that's going to cause some concerns.
Are we going to see a push for voting by mail? Washington State already does this.
Yeah.
Is that the future?
That's one thing that we're going to see a lot more of. I think we may well see some sort of push for secure online voting. I'm not sure it can be done. But we're going to see, we've had people talk about that before. I think even Ross Perot talked about doing things like that. And that was, 25 plus years ago. So I think we're going to, I think if those people who have been concerned about the security of things like early voting and no consequence absentee balloting and all that stuff have kind of just been steamrolled by events right now. And so I think those sorts of options, perhaps extending periods of early voting and things like that, we may well see that at least for this election cycle.
It's been interesting to watch the national media coverage of the president and his administration's response to the coronavirus pandemic, and separate from the issue of public health and all the decisions that are being made regarding that. Let's talk about the politics of it. He is being praised by some and panned by others. What does this mean for his reelection?
Well, he stumbled into this very badly initially. He didn't take it very seriously. He said it was going to be over with there were going to be 15 cases in the U.S. and they were going to go away. He was appearing at news conferences without his top public health officials initially. And for whatever reason, I think some people say Tucker Carlson, but anyway, so flipped and said, wait a minute, this is the problem. But then you suddenly started to see him take a completely different tone, be very, very serious about it. And notwithstanding what he said or when he said or whatever, he has certainly been deferring more and more to people who have specific expertise about these sorts of things. Dr. Anthony Fauci, who is the head of,
National Institutes of Health.
Yeah, he's the basically the infectious disease expert among all.
The top doc, so to speak, other than the Surgeon General.
Right, and maybe now his position may actually be more important than the Surgeon General's in a lot of ways. But he has certainly stepped up and been given the message of take this seriously, but don't panic. I think somebody else at the North Carolina but federal level who has really stepped up in a big way is Greg Murphy, who's the congressman from the 3rd District. He was the only MD in the General Assembly when he was there. He won the seat that used to be held by Walter Jones Jr., and he has been very active on social media, again, saying, listen, take these things seriously, do these precautions, wash your hands, practice social distancing. This is going to be something that's going to be really difficult for a period of a few weeks. But if we handle this right, then it will subside. If we don't handle this right, then we've got possibly months of complete disruption.
We've heard a lot about the flattening of the curve,
Right.
so to speak,
Right.
trying to make sure that we don't have a steep increase in diagnoses, essentially creating the bell that other countries have seen. We want ours to be flat. Okay, so that's the Trump position. What about Joe Biden as the presumptive Democratic nominee? Has all the air been sucked out of the room for him, or is he kind of raising his profile as part of this?
He did some things right before the second Super Tuesday, if you will, where he mentioned that he had convened a panel of experts, all respected medical and public health officials, and started talking about his own plans for dealing with the virus. I don't think that if you look at the way things stand as of the time we're recording and the vice president's plans, that the president's and former vice president's plans are really all that different. But he did sort of step forward a little bit before the president did on this. So I think right now people are essentially perceiving both of them on a par. The vice president sometimes presents a more calming presence, other times because of his verbal flubs, a less calming presence. And so, this is something that no one has dealt with probably since in a century as far as this is concerned. And we're, of course, a much more interconnected society and a much larger population than we had when the 1918 flu pandemic hit. So this is just something that's completely new, and some people are stepping up seemingly better than others about this.
And we'll have to wait and see if there is a political impact at all for either one of those candidates. Let's move to the North Carolina governor's race because it's gotten pretty interesting here. Of course, we have Democrat Roy Cooper, who is the incumbent, and he has been, along with his public health officials, really leading the charge here, reacting here in North Carolina. One of the things that he did a few days ago was to issue that executive order about no dining in at restaurants in North Carolina. You could still do delivery or takeout.
Right.
The current Lieutenant Governor, Dan Forest, who is also the Republican Party's nominee challenging Roy Cooper for the top job, reacted to that. Tell us about it.
Lieutenant Governor Forrest said correctly that the executive order that the governor issued was based on a state statute which gives him certain emergency powers, and that executive order had to be approved by a majority of the members of the Council of State. Those are the statewide elected executive branch officials. And it wasn't. We know at least 6 of the 11 voted against it, potentially 7. We don't know at this time, we don't know what State Auditor Beth Wood did. But they voted against the portion of it, not the portion of it dealing with providing additional benefits and things like that, scraping away the unemployment regulations and the like, unemployment insurance regulations. The part dealing with the restaurant closures and the banning of all large gatherings. And the argument they made, which is legally a correct one, is that it was not approved properly. And the other argument that they initially made and then kind of walked away from when they got some pushback was that perhaps it's possible that we could have a separate set of rules for large cities and urban and suburban areas and the more rural parts of the state, where the effective house arrest of everyone doesn't make any sense at all, where there are no large gatherings. I mean, why are you banning restaurants in very lightly populated areas? And why can't we have different sets of rules for different circumstances? It's going to be politically very, very difficult thing for Dan Forest to win, but I think he may be right on the law.
And of course, Carolina Journal is following every development of this situation, available online at carolinajournal.com, also on Twitter at Carolina Journal. Rick Henderson is editor-in-chief. Thank you, Rick.
Thank you very much, Donna.